Imagine waking up to find your entire farm dry, no water in the pipes, your crops dying, your animals suffering, and then discovering it wasn't an accident, it was your HOA Karen who cut you off. I never thought something as simple as water could become a weapon against me. For years, I had lived peacefully on my small farm, just outside of town. My family and I worked hard, raising livestock, growing vegetables, and selling fresh produce at the local market. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was honest, and we were proud of it. Then came the HOA. At first, they seemed like just another neighborhood association that wanted order and rules. But soon, one woman, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, Karen, started targeting me. She hated that my farm didn't match the community aesthetic. According to her, my barn was too rustic, my fences were too high, and my tractors made the neighborhood look unkempt. I brushed off her constant complaints. After all, my farm was older than the HOA itself. They couldn't just bully me into changing my livelihood. But Karen was persistent. She came by almost every week, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of my property like she was building a legal case. Then one scorching summer morning, I woke up to a disaster. The water lines to my farm were completely dry. At first, I thought it was a city issue, maybe a broken main or scheduled maintenance. But when I called the water department, they told me everything was fine on their end. My water supply had been deliberately shut off. I rushed to check the water control station that connected to my property, and that's when I saw the lock. A brand new lock installed over the valve. On the lock was a sticker, "Property of HOA." My heart sank. Karen had done this. She had finally found a way to cripple me. No water meant my animals would suffer, my crops would wilt, and within days my farm could be ruined. Standing there, staring at that lock, I clenched my fists. I knew I couldn't let her win. I didn't realize it then, but this was only the beginning of a battle that would end with federal agents stepping in, and the HOA itself collapsing under the weight of their own corruption. When I confronted Karen about the locked valve, she didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she smiled smugly from her porch and waved at me like I was some stranger trespassing in her neighborhood. "Your farm," she said in a voice dripping with arrogance, "does not align with our community guidelines. The HOA voted, and we decided it's best to encourage you to reconsider your activities here. Maybe turn it into a decorative garden instead of a working farm. Much cleaner." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was sabotage. She wanted to starve me out of my livelihood. When I tried explaining that I had legal rights to the land, she laughed. "Good luck with that," she snapped. "We have lawyers. We have authority. You can't win." Her words shook me, but I wasn't about to roll over. My animals were bleeding in the background, already thirsty, and I knew I had to act fast. So, I went to the HOA meeting that week, determined to get answers. The meeting was worse than I expected. Karen sat at the head of the table, practically glowing with power, while her loyal followers nodded along to everything she said. I explained that cutting off my water wasn't just unfair, it was dangerous, both for my farm and for the environment. But instead of sympathy, I was met with hostility. One board member even suggested that a farm doesn't belong in a modern neighborhood. Another said my rusty equipment was hurting property values. They acted like my hard work and heritage were nothing more than an inconvenience. The worst part? Karen held up a stack of papers and announced that the HOA had voted to fine me $500 a day until I complied. I felt like I was being strangled financially and physically, no water, no money, no options. But what Karen didn't know was that I had already begun documenting everything, the lock on the valve, the letters she had sent, even recordings of her threats. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to expose her. Little did I know, this was about to spiral far beyond Karen's petty power games. Soon, government authorities would take notice. And when they did, it wouldn't just be me who got justice, it would be the entire neighborhood. The days that followed were pure chaos. With no water flowing into my farm, I had to haul gallons from a nearby creek just to keep the animals alive. The summer heat was relentless, and every bucket I carried felt like a reminder of Karen's cruelty. Neighbors started noticing too. A few of them whispered to me that they disagreed with Karen's actions but were too scared to stand up to her. "She fines anyone who goes against her," one elderly couple told me. "We can't afford it." That's when I realized Karen's power wasn't just about rules, it was about fear. She ruled the HOA like a dictator, using fines, threats, and intimidation to silence anyone who dared oppose her. One evening, as I was pouring water into the animal troughs, Karen showed up again. "How long do you think you can keep this up?" she taunted. "Sooner or later, you'll give in. Sell the farm, and maybe we'll let you live here without trouble." Her smirk made my blood boil. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted to destroy everything my family had built. That night, exhausted but determined, I sat at my kitchen table and gathered all the evidence I had collected. Photos of the lock, copies of the ridiculous fines, video of Karen openly admitting she shut off my water. I knew this was bigger than just a neighborly dispute. I reached out to a lawyer friend who was shocked by what I showed him. "This isn't just harassment," he said firmly. "This could be a violation of federal law. Cutting off your water supply. That's tampering with utilities. They've crossed a line." His words gave me hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely powerless. The next morning, I filed an official complaint with both the local authorities and a federal agricultural bureau. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one, but not on her terms. What I didn't know then was that my complaint would trigger a chain of events that no one in the neighborhood could have predicted. The HOA thought they were untouchable, but their empire of intimidation was about to crumble. A week after I filed my complaint, I saw something unusual: 2 black SUVs parked near the HOA office. At first, I thought they were just visitors, but soon I spotted the badges: federal agents. Karen strutted out to greet them, acting overly polite, but I could see the nervous flicker in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The agents didn't waste time. They asked about the HOA's control over utilities, the fines they imposed, and why a farm, legally zoned for agriculture, was being targeted. Karen, of course, played innocent. "We're just enforcing community standards," she said sweetly, trying to hide the panic in her voice. But the agents weren't buying it. They asked to see the financial records of the HOA. That's when things started to unravel. Papers went missing, documents were misplaced, and Karen kept stalling. Meanwhile, word spread quickly in the neighborhood. People who had been silent out of fear began whispering to each other. "If the feds are involved, maybe something will finally change," one neighbor told me. For the first time in years, the stranglehold Karen had over everyone started to loosen. People were cautiously hopeful, though still wary of retaliation. That night, I got a knock on my door. It was the elderly couple from down the road. They handed me a folder filled with letters, fines, and even secret recordings of HOA board meetings. "We've been too scared to speak up," they admitted, "but you're standing up for all of us. If they're finally being investigated, they need to see this." I felt a surge of gratitude and determination. It wasn't just about my farm anymore. This was about everyone Karen had bullied. The next morning, I passed the evidence directly to the agents. Their expressions were serious as they flipped through the pages. "This is exactly what we needed," one of them said. At that moment, I knew Karen's empire was starting to crack. The days of her unchecked power were numbered. As the investigation deepened, Karen's behavior grew more erratic. She was used to being feared, but now people avoided her, whispering behind her back instead of bowing to her demands. At the next HOA meeting, I attended just to watch the show. Karen slammed her gavel like a judge sentencing criminals, demanding silence. But instead of compliance, the room was buzzing with frustration. One homeowner finally stood up. "We're sick of your rules, Karen," he said. "You fined me for having a flower pot on my porch. How is that even legal?" Others joined in. Voices rose. Fingers pointed. Karen tried to shout them down, but her once loyal board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was clear her grip was slipping. Desperate, she turned her fury back on me. "This is all his fault," she screamed, pointing straight at me. "He's trying to destroy our community." But her outburst only made her look weaker. People murmured, shaking their heads. I didn't even have to defend myself. The truth was finally sinking in. After the meeting, several neighbors quietly approached me. "If the feds shut them down, maybe we can finally breathe again," one whispered. Another added, "We've been trapped under her control for too long." Karen must have sensed it too, because the very next day, she sent me a letter threatening to sue me personally for defamation. I almost laughed. It was her last attempt to scare me into silence. But I wasn't alone anymore. Neighbors were backing me. The feds were digging deeper. And Karen's once mighty HOA throne was starting to crumble. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done yet. And I was right, Karen had one last, desperate move left, a move that would finally push the HOA over the edge. Karen wasn't one to accept defeat gracefully. A week later, she marched onto my property with 2 board members trailing behind her. She carried a stack of papers and wore her usual smug smile, though it looked more strained than before. "You think you've won?" she sneered. "Well, here's your reality check. According to these papers, your entire farm is in violation of community bylaws. If you don't vacate in 30 days, we'll seize your property." Her words hit like a punch, but I noticed something odd. The documents looked hastily printed, the seals smudged. She was bluffing. Still, she wasn't done. She pointed at my barn. "This is a hazard. I'll have it condemned. Your animals. Against regulations. Every day you resist, the fines will double." It was pure desperation, an attempt to scare me into submission. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I recorded the entire encounter, capturing her threats word for word. Later that evening, I handed the footage to the federal agents. When they saw it, one of them shook his head. She just sealed her own fate. The agents explained that Karen had crossed a legal line. Falsifying documents, tampering with utilities, issuing threats, it was no longer just harassment. It was criminal. I felt a surge of relief. For months, she had tried to break me. But now, every scheme she pulled only tightened the noose around her own HOA. Still, I didn't celebrate yet. I knew the storm was about to break, and when it did, the collapse would be bigger than anything Karen could have imagined. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. The neighborhood was still when a convoy of federal vehicles rolled in. Agents in jackets marked with bold letters stepped out, clipboards and warrants in hand. Karen, dressed in her usual pastel sweater, marched out of her house demanding answers. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. But the agents didn't flinch. They handed her a federal notice and began seizing documents from the HOA office. Boxes of records, financial statements, and even hard drives were carried out in plain sight of the stunned residents. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, whispering in disbelief. For years, they had been too scared to stand up to her. Now, they watched as her empire of fear collapsed in real time. Karen screamed, threatened lawsuits, and even tried to block the agents at the office door. But when they reminded her that obstruction was a federal offense, her face went pale. For the first time, she looked powerless. I stood at the edge of the crowd, silently watching. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about justice. The people Karen had tormented for years finally had proof that no bully, no matter how powerful they seemed, was above the law. That night, the neighborhood felt different. The air was lighter, conversations louder, laughter freer. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years came together, united by the downfall of the tyrant who had ruled over them. But for Karen, the nightmare was just beginning. The federal agent's investigation revealed shocking details. The HOA had been overcharging residents for years, pocketing maintenance fees that never went toward actual maintenance. They discovered Karen had signed off on fraudulent expenses, vacations, and even personal shopping sprees, all paid for with HOA funds. When the truth came out, people were furious. Those who had been silent out of fear now spoke loudly. Complaints piled up, and the HOA board dissolved under the pressure. Within weeks, the association was officially shut down. Karen tried to play the victim, claiming she was misunderstood and just doing her job. But no one believed her anymore. My water was restored, my fines erased, and my farm protected by law. But more than that, the community finally felt free. The grip of fear had been broken. For the first time in years, kids played in the streets without parents worrying about violations. People decorated their homes the way they wanted. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was finally ours again. And Karen? She was facing charges. The woman who once wielded so much power with a clipboard and a smirk was now left with nothing. The last time I saw Karen, she was being escorted out of the HOA office in handcuffs. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her voice shaking as she tried to argue with the agents. But the days of her controlling everyone were over. Neighbors watched in silence, some with pity, most with relief. She had it coming, one man muttered. Another said, I just wish this had happened years ago. The charges were serious: fraud, falsification of documents, tampering with utilities. She would spend years in court, possibly in prison. I thought I'd feel triumphant watching her fall, but instead, I felt something different: closure. The fight had cost me time, money, and endless stress. But in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for what was right. That night, as I sat on my porch with a glass of water, fresh, clean, and flowing again, I realized I had learned something valuable. Power built on fear never lasts. Eventually, truth wins. Months later, life on the farm returned to normal. My crops thrived, the animals were healthy, and water flowed freely once again. But the biggest change wasn't on my farm, it was in the community itself. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, neighbors began helping each other instead of reporting each other. Fences were painted bright colors, gardens bloomed, and the sound of laughter replaced the silence of fear. The elderly couple who had once been too afraid to speak up invited me over for dinner. You gave us our freedom back, they said with tears in their eyes. But I shook my head. No, I told them. We all did this together. As for Karen, she disappeared from our town. Rumors swirled about court dates and legal battles, but no one really cared anymore. She was no longer our problem. Standing on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the fields, I felt a deep sense of peace. The struggle had been hard, but it reminded me why we fight. Not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors, our families, and our right to live free from fear. And as the crickets chirped and the stars appeared overhead, I knew one thing for certain: my farm, my water, and my community would never again be controlled by an HOA tyrant. This was a new beginning.